Today we're going to take a look at how to paint clouds. And we've got 4 different artists we're going to look at and see how they simplified the design, created movement in their painting, and used values to create shape. So we're going to start with John Constable. He's a British painter, early 1800s, and he's got some studies here. He painted cloud studies outside on paper. You can see the brown paper showing through in the shadows, which are thinner. That kind of warms up the scene overall. But painting clouds is really about designing the sky. It's not about copying every cloud you see just as you see it. Instead, it's about thinking of big shapes, how the clouds are arranged across the sky, and how those shapes lead the viewer's eye. Overlapping forms and varied forms and changes in scale can help create a sense of movement, making the clouds feel like they're drifting, rising, or breaking apart. So don't think about detail first, if at all. Keep your clouds big and simple. Then the value does most of the work. Clouds read as light and dimensional because of clear, distinct value relationships. Bright highlights catching the sun, the middle values that are just turning away from the light, and then the shadows underneath make your clouds look three-dimensional. And by simplifying the values and grouping them together, you can suggest volume and atmosphere without overworking the paint. So when design, movement, and value works together, the sky becomes an expressive part of the painting and not just a backdrop. So you can see Constable's paintings here. He's got definite shapes for these clouds. And when you're painting outside, they're moving, they're changing. So he has to have a definite idea about the shapes, where they're going to go. And you want to keep the shapes varied. Not all the same size, not all lined up in a row. Some are in front, they're overlapping the clouds behind. So a lot of overlapping, because that's how you're going to create depth on our flat, two-dimensional surface. Here's another one. Again, very soft edges in the British atmosphere, because there's just so much moisture in the air. You don't have a lot of edges between the clouds. There's still 3 distinct values. You have the lights, the halftones, the darks, and he's arranging them in definite shapes with overlapping. Then the values create the effect of sunlight. Now, color-wise, he's using temperature, warmer colors in the lights, cooler in the shadows, and that warm and cool contrast creates the sense of sunlight and shadow. Here's another one, very small, quick study. He's using a very limited palette of indigo blue, which is kind of a black and blue in a tube with a little burnt sienna and white. Maybe some ochre, but I really don't see it. You can see the yellow paper of the cardboard coming through and kind of warming up the scene. But a lot of movement and 3 distinct values. Got a light here, halftone, and shadow. Again, you're going to come up with another value or 2 and you blend them together slightly. But you're starting out with 3 distinct values. There's another one, nice shapes in here. Designing the shapes using these sky holes, which are kind of negative shapes that gives more shape to the clouds. And a lot of nice overlapping to create the depth. Bigger clouds up front, smaller as they go back into the distance. Value relationship is very subtle between the values, not a lot of strong contrast, but there is, again, 3 distinct values: the light, halftone, and then the dark. Very heavy atmosphere. And the warm and the cool color, the cooler halftones and shadows and the warmer lights. Now let's go to Edgar Payne, who's painting on the other side of the world in the desert in the southwest. And here the atmosphere is very dry. It's not wet. It's not full of moisture like it is in England. So the clouds are more distinct. And Edgar Payne puts a lot of weight in the shapes of these clouds. So you can see the clouds are real similar to the shape of the mountains. He's using very angular lines to show the shape, making the clouds look heavy and kind of massive, like there's a lot of weight to them. They're going to look lighter than the mountains just because all the values are lighter. Values are a lot darker here. They still both have 3 values, kind of a dark, a light, and a halftone in there to show 3 dimensions. Same thing with the clouds. You got the shadow, halftone, and then the light. 3 values. Again, when you blend the light and the halftone together, you're going to get another value. Blend the halftone and the dark together, you get another value. But see your shape first in 3 simple values. Plan things out more simple. Big, simple shapes of the clouds. They're all variety of shape, not all the same size. A lot of overlapping to show depth. It's the only way to show depth in the sky, or one of the ways. Maybe there's another one would be value, but in temperature, so 3. But overlapping the shapes makes one shape come in front of the other. So you can see that here just really creates depth in those clouds. And you have to think about those things. You can't just copy what you see in the reference or even outside, because if you're not thinking about it, you're not going to show it. And think about negative space. Negative here being maybe the blue sky. Thinking about that shape between the clouds as well. The smaller sky holes in the clouds go a long way to give the clouds a little more interesting shape. Another one here, the values are a little closer together, but still 3 distinct values there, dark, light, and halftone. And designed carefully. You don't want your painting to look stiff or too detailed, but that doesn't mean you paint slapdash or not thinking about the shape. So he's very careful to think about the shape and the size. This one has a bit more detail being smaller value changes. And you have the evening or the setting sun, which when it strikes the clouds, they're going to get a little warmer and grayer at the base and gradually get a little stronger in color as they go up. But here is your warm temperature in the light, cool shadows, and that warm and cool contrast gives you the suggestion of strong sunlight on the clouds. And in most of these, the clouds are the kind of the focal point. They don't always have to be. Sky doesn't have to be the focal point, but in a lot of these of Edgar Payne's, they are. And again, very distinct shapes, designed in such a way that it's not too heavy on one side and too empty on another. Most of the time, you're going to have one side with most of the weight, but you're going to balance it on the other with smaller shapes or shape. It's never going to be half and half. You're never going to have a bunch of clouds here and then the same shape or amount or weight of clouds on the other side. It's going to have an imbalance, but it's going to be an artistic balance. The bigger shapes balanced by smaller shapes. And again, the overlapping and the simplified values really make it work well. You want it to look like paint. And these guys really made it look like paint. Now, this is Edward Siego, another British painter. 1920s to 1950s, I think, he painted. A very limited palette also, like Constable. Indigo blue, English red, maybe an ochre. So he's focusing more on values than he is color, but he is getting warm lights and cool shadows to show the light. So not so much big, simple masses here of individual clouds, but shapes of dark and light, within the clouds. And again, trying to overlap. But nice movement. Your eye kind of follows the movement of these clouds in here. Another one here, the darker shadow of the cloud comes forward, and these lighter shadows recede and go back, so creates a lot of depth. Not a lot of big overlapping clouds that are separate. It all kind of merges together with the softer edges, but it's the value changes that make it read well. Here's another shapes here. Again, overlapping big cloud here, overlapping these background clouds, and the simplified values. It just reads so much better when it's simplified. And most of these are, smaller studies. They aren't big finished paintings, but they're really effective. Same thing in here with watercolor. You still have the overlapping shapes, good value contrast, good balance between the shapes of the clouds. I have a few of mine here. This is a painting in Tucson in the desert. So clouds are more distinct, more dry atmosphere. So edges are a little sharper. I'm still starting out with light, halftone, and shadow. And then with a little bit of blending of one into the other, you get maybe a third or fourth, or a fourth or fifth value. A lot of reflection here from the sun hitting the mountain and bouncing up into the shadow, or hitting the ground down here and bouncing up into the shadow. So a little bit of warmth added to these cooler shadows. You can see it here really well too. Just that reflected light in the shadows makes it look more refined and shows the light a lot better. Anytime you can have light bouncing around and reflecting into the shadow, it's going to show what the light is doing. Of course, these clouds are real low, which makes it a lot easier. Here is a cloud burst in Tucson. Again, I've got the big dark shape here first, and designing or creating this little light shape with water suddenly bursting out. Now, the first time I saw these, they looked a little odd. The big heavy clouds with just water, like someone turned a bucket upside down. But they're really great to paint. A lot of drama in them. But keep it simplified. Using softer edges because it is rain, so there's not going to be sharp edges. Keeping the edges softer there. Another desert scene here. Designing the shape of these clouds. Having, the winds kind of blowing so they're trailing off. Using the negative value and color of the sky to cut in and shape up those little thin wispy clouds as the wind kind of blows them. It's hard to get the shape real thin and small accurately just by the positive brushstroke of the cloud. So using the darker sky to cut in and shape it up really helps. Again, starting with 3 values: dark, halftone, light. Then once I start blending, creates another value or 2, but see it simple first. And usually the shadows on the clouds and the halftones and the lights, all the values in the clouds are going to be darker than the values on the ground. I hate to say always, but I really can't think of a time where cloud values are going to be darker than the values on the ground. Of course, you're comparing shadow with shadow, so the shadow on the ground will always be darker than the shadow on the cloud. And the lights on the cloud will always be lighter than the lights on the ground or even in the mountain. Of course, you could have snow there, then it changes. So never say never, but usually clouds are always going to have the lighter values. Another desert scene, but very atmospheric. A lot of moisture in the air, so not many sharp edges. And the rain's starting to come down in the clouds. But starting with 3, and I'm designing these 3 shapes here. And the shape in there. So 2 to 3 values in each of those shapes to show some form and turning. And then really thinking about the softer edges because the atmosphere is so heavy. Here the clouds are, again, it's more in the southwest or west, so clouds are heavier, edges are a bit sharper. 3 distinct values and the overlapping to show that depth. Overlapping is really important. You don't want your clouds sitting side by side because then you lose any shape or sense of depth in your painting. You can see it here, just overlapping to show that depth wherever you can overlap. And if you don't see things overlapping, I would create some overlapping because it's just going to flatten your painting. That's the only way to show the depth. And the three distinct values. And designing the shapes. I have the biggest weight on this side, balanced by this, with a few smaller shapes on top. And there's no easy formula for balance and a good composition. You're just arranging the shape of the darker blue, or the shapes of the darker blue sky, with the shapes of the lighter value of the clouds. And not having it too symmetrical, even shapes on both sides. Having one side with bigger mass and the other side with a smaller mass or shape that kind of balances it. Gives it an artistic balance as opposed to balance that's too symmetrical. Here I'm placing the larger cloud just off center to the right, and then this overlapping a little bit to the left. Everything just overlaps a little bit, trying to vary the shape of the clouds, again with three values. And doing thumbnails first, where you're designing these shapes. You can at first see this as one big shape, and then this is another big shape. You can break it down to just 3 or 4 or 5 big masses of clouds and 3 or 4 big shapes of darker blue sky. Then you can break those up a bit more. Always start bigger and more simple and gradually break it up. Here's a little pastel study for a painting in Utah. But here the sky is the blue sky gradually turning lighter and more yellow till it hits the horizon. And then the violet clouds are on top of that. So the clouds are all going to be darker. And again, designing the shapes, I don't want these shapes to be, they're all kind of long and horizontal. I don't want them to be the same. I don't want it like that. And it's easy to get them too much the same. So trying to really think about the shape so that it's really varied. And at times the reference, or if you're outside, they won't look varied. Most of the time they are, but sometimes they will be too similar and you have to change it. So I've designed those shapes in such a way that hopefully it creates a better balance and variety of shape, and it makes more interesting composition. Here's a big thunderhead, and here the overlapping is within the same cloud. So I have kind of the foreground part of that big thunderhead. Same thing here. And all these are shapes that are overlapping each other. It's all part of the same cloud. Well, these aren't. But these are in here, and I still want to show that. Just like a mountain isn't perfectly vertical. It's maybe wider at the base and leans back like this cloud does. And you want overlapping shapes within the big mass of the cloud as it leans back. You can see it on the mountain here. It's these hills are just overlapping each other. And that's same thing you want on the cloud. It shows the form a lot better. And you do that with the shape and then the three values. The dark, the halftone, and the light. Always better to simplify first. And then the negative sky is what gives the big thunderhead its shape. So always pointing the contrast between the sky and the clouds. Last one here. It's a small little sunset in Tucson. Again, trying to vary the shape. Not as much overlapping. There's a little bit here, I guess there, but that's not really overlapping all that well. So could have pulled that out to create more of that overlapping feel. But here I was trying to capture quickly the sun hitting the lighter shadow that's warmer, and a little bit of halftone, and then the darker shadow. So the cloud is all in shadow with three values. I still want three values. There really isn't any bright sunlight hitting the cloud, but the bright sunlight is warming up the lighter part of the shadow there. So this is more about designing the shapes of the positive cloud and the negative real light sky. Think again in terms of designing the shapes, creating movement with overlapping and varying the size, and then value, simplifying the values to create shape and the feeling of depth and contrast.